Okay, welcome back to the podcast. This is episode number 178 with my guest, Kristian Paradis. Kristian is a pan player, lives in the Philadelphia area. He went to the University of Delaware, worked with Harvey Price there, and he currently works intimately with a band called Philly Pan Stars, based in Philadelphia. I've crossed paths with Kristian in various Brooklyn panoramas. Never really got a chance to sit down and hang with him much and chat. It was great to get to know him and get to hear about his background a little bit and what got him into pan. So I hope you enjoyed this conversation. He's a great advocate for the art form, and in specific the Philly Pan Stars. You should check them out. They're a great steel band. All right, hope you enjoy this conversation. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Kristian Paradis. All right, well, let's gavel this to order. Kristian Paradis, I'm really grateful that we're chatting because, you know, and just to be clear, when I do podcasts like this, it's a whole mix of like people I know really well, but then also total strangers. And to be quite honest, I love talking to total strangers more. Like it's more interesting to me to sort of start to scratch the surface on someone and just see what I learn and what we learn with each other. So you reached out to me on Facebook about probably 2 or 3 weeks ago. And I think that was the first time we had actually ever really touched base, if I'm not mistaken. And maybe we've crossed paths in Brooklyn Panorama a million times and just never really stopped. But
definitely done that. And I tried. You lived in Philly for a while, right?
I did, yes. When in 2000, probably 10 and 11, my wife is a pastor, so we did a year there because she was in the seminary in Philly. She's a Lutheran pastor.
So, I tried my hardest to get in touch with you while you were there because I think you were out in like Chestnut Hill area.
I was in Germantown.
Oh, I was in Germantown.
Shut up.
We were like neighbors. Yeah.
Where'd you? I lived on Sedgwick.
I was at McCallum and Haynes streets, right by Germantown City Hall.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Yeah. Well, I'm sorry. Well, just to be clear, I'm sorry if for some reason I missed that or we didn't quite. I feel like I dropped a ball. Let me officially apologize now, a decade later, for that.
No, it's no big deal.
But yeah, I want to get into. You're wearing the Philly Pan Stars shirt, and that's and I don't know much about Philly Pan Stars, but I know that I've seen you guys are in the Brooklyn pan scene for the Labor Day Carnival, and there's a really budding pan scene in the Philly area that, as you mentioned, I somehow managed to sort of miss when I was there. But before we get into that, I kind of just want to know about baby Kristian. Like, take me back to like, when did steel drums and like, what's your life, what brought you to this point, and when did steel drums kind of come across your field of vision?
Well, I'm trying to think. I may have been about 10 years old when I went on a family trip out to San Diego to visit some relatives, and kind of in this vacant lot in this neighborhood of like row homes, someone had set up kind of an impromptu theater. Mm-hmm. So there was a fence across the front of the lot. Of course, this was a long time ago, so I'm really racking my memory to find all this. But there were two dudes, Trinis, who just had kind of set up this theater, and they were playing pan, and I was just hooked. Like the sound of it really drew me in. So I remember my parents had a hard time pulling me away from that, Mm-hmm. And
what did your parents? Sorry to interrupt. What did your parents do? Were they musicians?
No. My parents are both deceased now, but my father had been an engineer. My father was he was a World War II veteran, believe it or not. So
can I ask you, did you pick his brain about World War II, or is that one of your regrets as a young person like me? I had a grandfather who he was in it right at the tail end, and I never asked him anything, and I feel like such an idiot that I never did.
Well, I had the foresight, I guess, when my dad's health was declining a little bit to, ask him a lot of questions about his history and about the family. And I know, within the family, I'm the only one that he ever talked about his military experience because I was in the Navy too.
Oh, you were? Okay.
Right. Yeah, I joined the Navy for steel band reasons.
Well, thank you. I would love to talk about too, but thank you for joining the service. My nephew, and thank you for your service. My nephew has just joined the Marines. He's not a musician, but he's now in Japan, Okinawa. So.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I was in Yokosuka.
I never served, but I have family close enough to me and some dear friends who were in the Gulf. No, in served in Kuwait in the most recent sort of Middle Eastern fronts. So that service mentality is getting closer to me, so I'm understanding it better, as I guess what I'm saying. So.
Oh, yeah. Hey, I don't. It's not that I don't have any regrets about it, but it paid off in some ways.
But that's everything in life. I mean, I would say the same about playing contemporary music.
Yeah.
I don't have. It's not that I don't have regrets, but there's
some composers more than others, I'm sure.
Yeah, but but go ahead. I mean, so continue.
So I got hooked out on the West Coast. From there, I had been taking organ lessons, and I think by that time I maybe had started playing clarinet in school band. But right away, I knew that I wanted to be doing something related to pan, and there wasn't any avenue for me at that point. But I switched to drums in school band, started taking drum lessons with the aim that at least that would get me closer to the goal.
Mm-hmm.
I managed to get my hands on kind of a tourist ping pong pan, and figured a few things out, abused the hell out of that instrument, but, managed to figure a few things out, and then got to really dive deep once I went to college.
Where'd you go to school?
I went to University of Delaware.
Mm-hmm.
I did my undergrad there, graduated in 99, joined the Navy 4 years, and then came back to Delaware for my master's.
Maybe and that's Harvey Price, right?
It was, yeah.
It was, okay. Harvey is somebody, too, that I think when I first started teaching at NYU as a grad student, Harvey's somebody who, again, it's like, I'm always amazed at how small the steel band world is, but how many, again, how many people I don't actually know, and we just sort of, cross paths. And Harvey's definitely somebody that I've crossed paths a lot via email and on social media, and have never actually met him face to face. And he seems, from what I can tell, he seems to have been a big driving force one of the driving forces on the East Coast, but especially at the University of Delaware. Is that all basically? Am I observing that relatively correctly?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Okay. So I was there when the first iteration of steel band at UD came in. Because I think we got our first set of pans in 95 or 96 there at UD.
Mm. Who built them?
Those pans, well, we had some very, very old Ellie cellos.
Mm-hmm.
We had a guy named Alvin. I don't remember his last name. Alvin built some basses for us. I think we had some Invader style tenors, mm-hmm. and some other Ellie double seconds. So it was kind of a mix of Ellie's stuff and Alvin's stuff. Alvin was a guy who was at that time living in Wilmington, Delaware.
Okay.
And worked closely with bands.
So when you're at UD, before you graduate with your undergrad, can you just tell me a little bit about the program there? Like what kind of rep were you all playing, and what was the, as you going from having a ping pong pan and being like, oh, I'm figuring some stuff out, to all of a sudden going into school where the environment is you're studying this seriously, what was that like for you, and what was that experience like for you?
Well, I mean, it was great. I was lucky that I've been, I have kind of 25 years in the steel bands at University of Delaware to kind of see how it grew. And in those early days, what we ended up doing was arranging a lot of our own music. We had these instruments. We had a couple of, me and the guys who were kind of the core of the band at that time had a few albums. So we had, Our Boys Pan Progress CD, which was huge back then.
I have that one.
Yeah, we had a couple of Lord Kitchener best of CDs.
Were these Ice Records? I know the Our Boys was Our Boys on Ice Records, or was that?
They were on Mango, which I think that was a subsidiary of Island Records, if I'm not mistaken.
And was that Our Boys one? I mean, I know Tom Miller played drums with Our Boys at some point. Was that the one that he played drums with?
Yeah, well, I mean, he did most of the arrangements, although it's really hard to find the credit. But yeah, I think
Okay.
I think Tom did most of the arrangements, and then Andy did one arrangement. And I think maybe there were a couple of Ray tunes,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
Ray's arrangements too.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, so we did that, and then we had what was the Super Blue album?
There's one arrangement of his called Barbara that I know that gets played a lot by steel bands.
Yeah, no, this was after Barbara. It was the one that had Happy Carnival. It had Signal for Lara. I don't know. Anyhow, we had like a core group of players who really kind of got into Pan deep, and we all just started transcribing tunes, arranging them poorly, and then kind of figuring things out. But that process, I think, having the room to do things poorly actually helps you make progress really fast.
Oh man, you do not. I mean, that's the whole premise of my podcast is like, I started back in 2016. This is 2015 maybe when like I don't want to get into politics. I mean, unless you want to talk politics, I'm happy to. But when we were getting to the current administration sort of winning, and I personally was like, we can't talk to each other, and I'm not good at talking to people I don't agree with or don't even really know that well, so I'm going to start doing it. And I did this podcast, and it's just like it wasn't until I did like 100 of them that I understood how shitty I was at talking to people. And like you start to learn like when to be quiet, when to just sit in silence and let someone speak. Like all of those things are really hard to figure out. But similarly to arranging pan music, like you don't know what you don't know, and you have to get in there and fail a bunch of times. And I'm curious, and for me, when that failure, I didn't really start to learn how to fix it with like pan arranging, and I'm still not, I wouldn't say I'm a pan arranger, but just in terms of working with steel bands until I started meeting Trinidadians and Caribbean people in particular. Can you tell me, like, when did that element, like when did working with Trinidadians start to enter your life, or was that always the case at UD?
Yeah, well, Harvey made a lot of contacts with the West Indian community in Wilmington really early on. So, I mentioned Alvin. Alvin was a really amazing contact for us because he was a pan builder and tuner. There was another guy, Atiba Fields, who's still a close friend of mine. And he's he was the bass player with Brother Valentino back at a certain point. But he plays pan, a strong musician, real good advocate for pan. In fact, I think he's down in Trinidad right now, and I think he's currently playing with Calypso Rose.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So,
that's awesome.
He's still on the scene. There's another guy, Trevor Stubbs, is a pan builder and player who had a long association with Phase 2, close with Oakley. Those may have been the first three guys that kind of, opened up the culture a little bit to me.
And what was that? I mean, but for you, what were some of the things that were like, oh, moments as you were like hearing them talk about arranging or the food or hearing the way the language is spoken? Like, what were some things for you that were like, oh, like, not that you've been doing it wrong, but that it's time to sort of retool the way you were seeing some things?
Man, I feel like I have a couple of those moments every day still, even 25 years later.
Well, that's good. That means you're a human. I mean, as far as I know, as far as I can tell, that's a good thing.
Yeah. I think when I was really trying to pull information out of Stubbs, he said a few things about kind of how to interpret rhythms in the steel band context. Up to then, I had a very, very traditional music schooling, and I kind of played rhythms authentic to the way they're printed on the page, a little bit robotic. But, it was after working with Stubbs that I realized often in Calypso music and in Trini music, when you see like the rhythm da ba 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 ba, especially if it's repeated like that, it shouldn't be that mechanical, and you can almost make it a quintuplet,
Mm-hmm.
somewhere between where it's printed and a quintuplet, and like take the average of that, and you're going to be spot on.
Mm-hmm. And vice versa, having quarter note triplets, you can't, just going da 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 da. Like it's not ever going to feel like that. It's going to zack gak 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 gak. There's going to be
Right.
a lilt to it. It's
Yeah,
not swung.
and
And to be clear, it's not swung. It's not da 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 da. It's this weird mash of. It's a hybrid on the spectrum. It's somewhere hovering in some weird netherworld.
you're right. And those triplets, somewhere between like a dotted, not dotted rhythm and an actual triplet. And that was one that I always like really tried to drive home with my students. Like, even if you see triplets printed in cut time, you've got to do that still. And like for some reason, like if something was printed in common time, students had no problem catching that feel. But in cut time, man, half note triplets in cut time really threw them. So
Yeah. Well, do you, when you teach that stuff, how do you? I mean, is it there's a point at which, like, for me, I mean, again, I'm really fortunate that I teach at a place where you can just get on the subway and have a huge Trinidadian population in 10 minutes,
yeah,
and I teach with Kendall Williams now at Princeton, or at NYU and at Princeton, and it's just like I can just be like, hey Kendall, can you phrase this for me? And it's just way quicker for them to hear somebody who has that in their bones from when they were 3 play it.
Yeah.
Like how do you personally go about teaching that stuff to students and get them to understand it? I know for me, like I have to practice playing those triplets before I remember how it felt, like because I don't do it. You don't do that in John Cage's music. There's other ways you feel a 5 and a 7 in John Cage's music that is unique to his music, but with calypso and soca, that's been something I have to think about it a little bit before I say it, just to make sure I'm actually remembering how those rhythms are felt.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. For me, I've been fortunate that I don't keep one foot in the legit music world. Like,
okay.
I dove into steel band with both feet now. So I don't have to switch modes ever, I guess.
Well, I may be jumping headfirst into the pool with you here in a couple years, depending on how the election goes. So if you need, I may need some help. Throw me a life raft if I decide to take my foot out of the other one and jump full into the pan.
Man, what a scandal that would be if you jumped in with Philly Pan Stars, huh?
I think the world needs fewer scandals these days. I'll just toss it right over the plate, Well, let me ask you. So, the Navy. You mentioned the Navy, and you sort of joked about the steel band portion of it. I went to Dover High School, and Tom Miller brought the Navy steel band to my high school the year after I graduated, and they did a whole thing with Ray Holman, and it was like awesome. I mean, it was it was raging. I mean, it wasn't like you're getting together and you're just playing Mary Ann, and that's it. Like these were folks who could shred, and all wearing Navy uniforms, and I felt like in that moment, this weird sort of like, I didn't know what national pride was as a freshman in college, but I was like, I am psyched that my government feels important enough to actually make the national instrument of another country part of our armed forces.
Wasn't that amazing? Yeah.
And then it got disbanded. And I'm curious if you could just tell me a little bit about your experience in the Navy Steel Band, and because I think most people, quite frankly, even in the pan world, may not know that the Navy had a steel band.
Yeah, and it's that band was so important in the history of pan globally too. Not just in the history of pan in the U.S. or anything like that. That band spurred a lot of innovation even back in Trinidad.
Well, tell me why.
So,
Tell me why.
Oh, well, I mean, I think one of the ways was the Navy Steel Band gave Ellie Minette some of his first opportunities to tune outside of Trinidad and kind of expand his concept of where this instrument could go.
When did the Navy? Sorry, I jumped the gun with that question. Take me Navy Steel Band. I never heard of it. Like when did it start?
So it started, man, I don't know if I could give you exact dates. I know it started in the 1950s.
No kidding. Shut up.
Yeah, it started in the 1950s in Puerto Rico. And Andy Martin has a whole book about this that you got to read.
I will. What's it called?
Yeah. It's called Ambassadors of Steel.
Okay.
But so it started in the 1950s, and it was started by Admiral Daniel Gallery, who was famous in World War II for being the first admiral to board and capture a German U-boat. And along with that U-boat, they captured the Enigma machines and were able to, crack codes and things like this.
So the guy who found the Enigma machine,
yeah,
also in his brain rattling around was like, yeah, when I'm done with the Enigma machine, we're going to start a steel band. Like,
yeah, it's that preposterous.
I love people so much, Kristian. I can't even tell you that. Yeah, like, that's amazing.
So, as I'm sure the Navy had a refueling station in Chaguaramas, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so Dan Gallery had visited there at some point, caught a taste of pan, and ordered his Navy band, which was stationed in Puerto Rico, to drop their clarinets and tubas and to learn pan. And because he was Admiral Dan Gallery, the man who captured a U-boat, like, he could get away with that stuff. That stuff wouldn't fly with just your run-of-the-mill admiral.
Kristian, stop for 2 seconds. I'm really sorry. This may seem offensive. I need you to just get that book, Ambassadors of Steel. Just start reading it to me. We'll pick up. I mean, I have to be done at 11. We'll pick up again next week. You can just keep reading. But this is like such an amazing story.
Yeah.
I know it has nothing to do with you personally, but this is fascinating.
I'm a little surprised you hadn't heard all of this stuff.
Well, I have. I mean, don't be. I'm an idiot, and there's lots of things. I know way more about John Cage's music than I do about other pockets of the pan world, and that's why I'm talking to you, because I have a tertiary knowledge. Again, like, I knew the Navy Steel Band existed. I know about how I know how the 2 plots of land in Trinidad became naval bases. I knew that happened prior to World War II. Because we traded 50 destroyers to Churchill in exchange for 2 plots of land in Trinidad. World War II, or then Pearl Harbor happens. We're now in the war. Now there's a refueling station. It's like all of these things, puzzle pieces, were getting put into place. But I think for me, what did Trinidad smell like part of these stories? This is actually the stuff that I don't know. And I'm really this is the shit that's fascinating to me. So sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you there, but I did. And I'm sorry, but continue.
No. Oh, where did I leave off?
You left. So he is in Puerto Rico, and he asked the band there to switch to playing pan.
Yeah. So they did that. He sent them down to Trinidad. I think they worked closely with Invaders at that point, if I'm not wrong.
And that's where Ellie's tie comes in, I imagine.
Yeah.
Because he was with Invaders.
Ellie's reputation in Trinidad was already pretty well established.
Mm-hmm.
But, so they did that. They came back to Puerto Rico, kind of told the Admiral that it's way deeper than they thought and that they needed more help. And so he pulled some strings to get Ellie to visit Puerto Rico. And some fans there.
That is okay. I won't make you. I was joking about reading me the book, and I won't make you give me the Cliff Notes fiction. I'll read it. But so now you enter the Navy Steel Band when?
Well, here's where it gets funny, right? So I graduated University of Delaware with 2 degrees. I got one in computer science and one in music.
Uh-huh.
And I was dreading a career in computer science. I had no desire to sit in front of a computer screen for the rest of my life.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I found out about the Navy Steel Band, that was like my lifeline, right? So I auditioned. I did really well in the audition, I think. They were messing with me a little bit, asking for play a F-sharp Spanish Phrygian scale and stuff like that, and I was like, oh, I can work my way around that. So I did all right.
I think I would fail that test miserably, bro.
Oh.
I'd be like, all cows eat grass. I'm not sure about the F-sharp Phrygian.
You're about scales and stuff like that then than I am now. So I did all that, signed my contract with the government, went to boot camp, and then at some point during boot camp, I got a visit from a Master Chief musician who came to see me in the barracks and said these words that I'll never forget. The Navy Steel Band has been disbanded. You still have a contract with the government. And so you have a choice in front of you. You can either go to the Armed Forces School of Music and re-audition on drum set and try to get into one of the fleet bands as a drum set player, or you can paint ships gray for 4 years. So
I don't want to assume the decision you made, but Kristian, what choice did you make?
I went to the Armed Forces School of Music.
Not a big fan of Gunmetal Gray, are you?
Oh, well, I still got plenty of that. But yeah, so that's how I ended up. I got into the show band station based in Japan.
Okay.
And played big band drums for 4 years. But while I was in Japan, that also led me to hook up with Yoshihiro Harada, and I was one of the early members of Panorama Steel Orchestra.
Mm-hmm.
And I got in tight with a lot of the Japanese pan players at that time. Now there are a lot more of them, but.
Can I ask you a question about that? I was in Trinidad in 2015 drilling Brooklyn Steel Orchestra for the ICP competition, and
I ran into you there too. Yeah.
Okay, we were probably all decked out in our costumes and covered in carob, so I maybe don't remember much of that night. But
the carob was covered in us.
Yes, you mentioned earlier that like you grew up playing some of the calypso rhythms like square, and you have because you weren't from that culture, and me too. I remember being in Trinidad at that point and feeling like, oh, this is there's all these bands from all over the world, but specific Japan, and then hearing Japan play, the Japanese band play, and was it Panorama Steel Orchestra? That was the band that played?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yep. And hearing that band, and about 1.5 minutes in being like, this is a Japanese band playing calypso. This sounds like Japanese people playing calypso in the same way it sounds like an Ohio kid playing calypso whenever my high school steel band. I'm saying that not ascribing any negative emotions or feelings about that. I was just like calling balls and strikes. Like, oh, wow.
Yeah.
Except when they got done, that audience went ape shit.
Yeah.
And I thought to myself, the audience cares less about that feel than I do. Like, why am I putting so much weight in that? And I'm just kind of curious, like, being one of the few foreign bands in that and they placed really high, if I'm not mistaken. Is that right?
I think we came in 8th. I think we were ahead of Silver Stars. I remember that.
You guys beat out some Trinity bands, and out of 23 bands. So anyway, can you just talk a little bit about like why are there so many pan players in Japan? How did pan explode? I mean, I have so many friends that are have Japanese Yoko Asada. Like, I'm just curious, how in the hell did pan get in Japan so in such a big way?
Yeah. I mean, I wish I could tell you more than just that. It seems like when Japanese people choose a passion, again, they seem to dive in with both feet.
Uh-huh.
So, when I was living in Japan, pan players were pretty rare. Japanese pan players were pretty rare. There was, Harada-san and kind of, people who kind of attached themselves to him. And then there was a pan tuner, Sonobe, who no longer tunes, from what I understand. And I think there may have been 1 or 2 pan players down south too.
Okay.
But I think it's just been a matter of people, kind of picking that as their pursuit and just really, really going all in on it. I couldn't say more than that.
No,
it's been cool to see how it's grown.
I just think it's one of the things. I mean, I think right now the conversations around in the air about how other cultures look at or adopt other cultures' music, like how a Japanese culture is going to absorb a Trinidadian music and then perform it. Like, what does that mean? How does that happen? Why does that happen? What changes when that happens? Is it good? Is it bad? Like, all of those things to me are questions. They're just things I'm noticing being asked. But again, like you can have all the thoughts about that stuff, except when I was in Trinidad and they played and that whole audience stood up and went ballistic, there's a point at which I have to not care about what I personally think and just be like, well, if the approval from Trinidadians is there, then why am I questioning what's happening? And again, like, I don't have a question here or even really a fully formed thought, as you can tell, but it's fascinating to me that pan is one of those things that somehow, like a weed poking up out of the cement in various cultures, somehow manages to always do it. And why I'm that's why I'm talking to people, but it's just an observation I have.
I'll tell you something. Being part of Panorama Steel Orchestra during the ICP was one of the weirdest and best experiences of my life. Just to be, kind of the native English speaking bass player who really didn't belong to either culture that was there, but kind of like as a third party, as a participant observer, right? Mm-hmm. It was wild, man. And some of the cultural disagreements and, little clashes. I'll give you an example. So, we were every band in the ICP was hosted by a local band, right?
That's right.
So,
like BSO, where were you guys at?
We were at Pandemonium. We were at Pandy.
Got it.
And so one of the first nights there, when the full band was rehearsing, Pandemonium folks kind of hosted a dinner at the Pan Yard for all the Japanese players who came in. And, it was great. There was roti and palau and all the stuff you'd want to see at a good Trini dinner. Mm-hmm. And at the end of the meal, all the Japanese players kind of took all of the styrofoam containers, kind of brushed off all the food garbage into a garbage bag, stacked the styrofoam containers, sorted out all the plastic utensils, and then sorted out all the paper napkins, and had everything, all neatly arranged in different piles. Mm-hmm. And then I remember, people hanging from Pandemonium just kind of like standing back, like kind of watching all this. And then after the Japanese were done sorting all of their garbage, they kind of just all crammed it into garbage bags, undoing everything and tossed it somewhere. But, there were a million little things that really highlighted, just about how different those two cultures were, that were even more apparent, to me from a third culture, kind of like watching.
Well, it's one of the things too. I mean, I grew up, I heard things about, other cultures, whether it be about black cultures, like, oh, they're lazy or they don't show up on time. And, you hear the stereotypes. And then, again, as a third party, and for me, I've always tried real hard to, and it's like I'm being asked to drill sometimes. And it's like you can't take a passive role when you're being the driller in front of a band. That said, I try real hard to be like, what am I observing here in terms of how this band, not even just this culture, but this band prioritizes things. Some bands in Trinidad prioritize rehearsal discipline over the social aspect. You go to Renegades, nobody's screwing around in Renegades. Nobody's drinking at their pan or eating at their pan. But that doesn't mean that's right or wrong. You go to Skiffle Bunch, you go to Phase, the vibe is different. The thing I've always observed is like it's just how cultures prioritize different things in their world. Sometimes, time promptness isn't the thing that's at the top of the list. It has nothing to do with being hard workers or not, because they'll tell you rehearsal starts at 7. It doesn't actually start till 9:30, but they're going to go till 4. So you can't say this is a lazy culture. That's not, it's just a reprioritization. And again, it's like the Japanese culture prioritizes disposal of waste in a specific way. Trinidadian culture, and this is a broad brush, but it's like they don't. And I do feel like that moment of a Japanese culture having to just sort of deal with that, because you're guests. And what I know about Japanese culture, again, I could be broad brushing here, being a guest somewhere is a very important role. And learning how to do that, learning how to navigate that is crucial. And I have my students go to Brooklyn like, man, you need to go to a pan yard. You know why? Because you're going to have to say a prayer at the end of the rehearsal. You're not going to do that at NYU because I might get fired, and I'm not going to try to do that. But it's important that you understand that that's a prioritization in the pan yards I've been to.
Yeah.
And that's important to learn. So anyway, just to sort of, I'm just re-highlighting the things you're saying as like, that's crucial. That's as an observer, as a third party, observing how a culture prioritizes things is crucial to your understanding of that culture.
Yeah.
Can we get into your Philly Pan Stars? I know I'm sort of been avoiding the most obvious advertisement you have here, and the thing that is now like your main, it seems to me, your main focus. Like, can you tell me about Philly Pan Stars and what they're? I mean, I've seen you're one of the few bands that is outside of the Brooklyn Caribbean pan scene that performs over Labor Day. Can you tell me about how you got involved with Pan Stars?
How did I get involved with Pan Stars? Hard for me to remember. I vaguely remember my first time at the Pan Yard, and that was long before Pan Stars ever entered Panorama. Mm-hmm. But we were a fixture at Juve, and Pan Stars always placed very, very highly during Juve, but never had the forces to be a Panorama contender until 2016. But yeah, so I jumped in there. I couldn't even tell you what year. I'm sorry.
That's fine.
It's been a while now. I jumped in there and played tenor in the stage side for a long time. Mm-hmm. And then at a certain point, started doing a little bit of arranging for the band. And I guess it was 2015. It was during a conversation with Pompey, who's the band captain, mm-hmm. and a couple of other guys that were there. They were all talking about how they wish, we could do a Panorama. And the whole thing that was limiting us, believe it or not, it wasn't instruments. We had the instruments. Mm-hmm. We had more basses than you would believe. We had more cello pans, a ton of pans in the low end. Mm-hmm. And the whole thing that was holding us back was just the lack of players, because, the Trini community in Philly, or the West Indian community in Philly, isn't as massive as it is in New York to be able to field those bands. But because I had been teaching at University of Delaware, I had access to students. And so we had a conversation that if I could bring in 40 outside players, we would have a band. And so I did. I started selling the idea to my students at UD. At that point I was teaching the beginning band, and on various semesters I was the assistant director of the advanced band, Delaware Steel, with Harvey. Mm-hmm. So I started selling the idea to students, and then I also started to reach out to other players around the U.S. 1 year in Trinidad, I played with Silver Stars, which you probably know is full of Americans, mm-hmm. right? Mm-hmm. And it occurred to me that, hey, any American that's willing to buy a ticket to go to Trinidad to play a Panorama mm-hmm. would probably buy a ticket to go to Philadelphia to play a Panorama, or to New York. Right. So I reached out to them. I reached out to a couple of other collegiate steel band directors, and managed to get, I think I brought in 45 or 50 outside players to play in Philly Pan Stars mm-hmm. to augment, the 20 players that maybe we had homegrown, so that we could have a band that could represent the city well, mm-hmm. And if you talk to Pompey, the band captain, he'll tell you that the quote he remembers for me is saying, "I don't want to look like that Boston band," because I guess in 2015 or in 2014, Boston Metro came down, mm-hmm. and they didn't have a lot of players, and compared to the size of the New York bands, like just visually, they didn't look like a contender. It didn't look like a band.
One of the unfortunate things, the big differences in the Brooklyn Panorama compared to Trinidad, there's many differences, but one of the big ones is there's no different categories. Like,
Yeah.
When you compete in Brooklyn, you could have if you have a 12-member band or you have a 110-member band, they're competing in the same category. And in Trinidad, there's single pan, there's medium, small band, like there's all these different categories that you can slot into and compete against the same size of group.
Yeah. 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 And I don't necessarily think that's a drawback either. I like having everyone in one category. I think what you saw at the ICP, it was interesting to see, bands that we think of as medium bands or small bands. Remember Supernovas at ICP,
Right.
still small at that point, competing against the big boys. And like, it put everything into a new light because some bands clearly outplayed bands that were in larger categories, right? So, yeah, I think that's a cool thing about New York. And the other cool thing about New York is that the time limit is still 10 minutes. Man, I love that. I think those extra 2 or 3 minutes in an arrangement, like there's a lot of great music that happens in that extra, it's just an opportunity to dive deeper into the variations.
I would love to. I mean, this is one of the. I would love to just like if I had a year of nothing to do on my hands, I would just be talking to different people like this, and we would pick like one panorama to just dig into and just do that every day. And at the end of the year, you'd have 365 like deep dives on different panoramas that happen. Like there's so much music that happens that just disappears and no one ever knows about outside of that parking lot in Brooklyn or the Pan Yard, the month prior. And anyway, just in terms of the canon, like, man, there's only like how much do you think of the canon actually gets published and known about outside of those that world? I would say maybe 5% of the music. Yeah. Maybe that's generous so anyway, just to say I agree with you. Maybe the 10-minute limit gives a little bit more leg room to an arranger to try some stuff out.
I've been thinking if you want to do a deep dive into 1 year of Panorama, we should do 1979 when finals, there was a boycott. So there was never a finals. So nothing was ever decided. But there are some recordings of like prelims.
This is in Trinidad or in Brooklyn?
In Trinidad.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, there was no Panorama in Trinidad in 1979. But there are still some recordings from preliminaries. It would be really cool, I think, to track those down.
Well, let's maybe I'll take 51% responsibility to make that happen, and if you have the other 49,
as long as you get the lion's share, I'm cool.
I will take the extra percent to make that happen. Well, can you tell me a little bit? I mean, I appreciate your approach to bringing in students. I mean, that's the one thing for me at NYU that dawned on me early on. I've been there now for 16 years, and it was like 2010 when Kendall was a student of mine there, where I was like, oh yes, of course, like there's only so much I'm going to be able to teach these kids about this stuff. They should just get on the subway and go check this out. And I've been really pushing them. I haven't required it of them, but I've been pushing it on them to be like, go do this. And little by little, I have about 4 or 5 kids every year that go do it. But there's kids from Oberlin who come out and play with Kassem. There's a whole that is a very common thing. And in Trinidad, like you said, Liam Teague, I don't know, he's not arranging for Silver Stars anymore. I'm not sure, but he also would. I mean, when Liam would come down, there'd be a huge crop of kids from the University of Akron would go down and play. West Virginia, NIU, like that's becoming more common. But I think it does two things. It makes a band feel bigger. But it also gives those students if they can't afford to go to Trinidad, like you don't need a passport to know what it's like, I guess is the larger point, So anyway, just wanted to highlight, like, it's awesome that you're pushing your students to do that.
Yeah, well, it was a really, really effective marriage of the two bands for a long time. So I think both sides of the equation got a lot out of it.
Well, what's the current state of affairs with Philly? I mean, I know obviously Panorama is in Brooklyn is canceled this year, but what's the state of affairs with what's Philly Pan Stars? Where are you guys' heads at now?
Things are a little rough right now because the future is so uncertain, and now that I'm no longer at University of Delaware, I've lost access to a lot of resources that benefited Pan Stars. So, from the looks of things, we are going strong to win a Panorama in New York very soon in the next year or two. depending on when the next panorama is.
Mm-hmm.
But honestly, being shut down like this has really, really taken its toll on the band. We've had a couple of key players that have had to move away because they've lost work.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Did you have anybody?
I don't know.
I mean, for me, pardon me. There's the biggest thing about missing Panorama or missing this I don't say this culture, but just the being in a Panorama band this right now is the social aspect. I mean, to me, like I haven't hugged anybody since March, and one of the things that when I'm on my deathbed and somebody's like, "What do you remember about a pan yard?" It's gonna be the physical contact with people. It's gonna be everybody you fist bump with. Everybody, when you walk in a pan yard, says hello to you. When you say goodnight, they all respond. Those sorts of things are the things that I'm really missing right now. And when I but also, I don't know if you know Martin Douglas, Dougie Douglas with CrossFit. I mean, he passed away in March of COVID. And it's like the impact of this other thing that we're all dealing with and the loss of somebody like Dougie, who was a big mover and shaker in the scene. I have anxiety about what that means for the sort of social glue that is holding this whole thing together. I have anxiety about it. I'm not worried that I mean, the one thing I've learned about pan culture is that they figure it out, and I trust in that now. But man, it's really hard to see. It's just really hard for me to see. Like again, being that third party observer most often. It's really hard to see, and I hope we figure it out. I hope Trinidad is able to open up again I've been telling Junior Bergrello at Skiffle Bunch, he's the mayor in San Fernando. I'm like, send a jet ski. I'll be pulling up. like I'm going to be rowing my ass down there in March or in February, even if you guys aren't opened up. So send me a jet ski because this is, I don't know, it's terrible. I mean, we're both agreeing this is an awful time, but we gotta have hope and figure it out, because I think when the panorama does happen again, that's the one I think people are going to go gangbusters, and I'm very very excited to see it.
I hope so. Philly still has a message to send too. So
yeah.
But part of my ulterior motives of talking to you today was to try to keep Philly, part of the conversation of what's going on in New York too, because hey, I've heard rumors about there not being a panorama next year either because of all this. And, whatever the New York Pan community decides to do, I want to make sure that Philly is part of the conversation, because I don't want us left out of it.
Well, I want to, I appreciate you reaching out and for that ulterior motive, but I want you to not feel like that needs to be an ulterior motive. Like we are in the same, we're all in the same boat. Actually, we're all in the same storm, just different boats. And my boat has been tethered to the pan boat scene for my life, and I don't plan on untethering it. So my boat's tied to yours, whether you like it or not, my friend. And let's keep this conversation going. I will say one of my regrets, just as a person, and I will say it's, just in my 30s, missing not being in town, being on the road a lot, not connecting with the UD scene as proactively as I should have, is something that I do wish I had done better. Just as a young kid trying to figure out where my ass was supposed to be half the time, I do regret not reaching out to Harvey more often. So, but all that said, we are now connected, and I will take 51% responsibility to keep that connection going as we move forward, because this has been awesome. And man, I am going to buy that Ambassadors of Steel book, because you blew my mind with that. So if for no other reason, that this podcast has been worth it to me, because you really, really taught me a whole lot.
And before you dive into the book, just check out the bibliography and the interviews, and you can see my name like right under Andy Norell's. It's pretty cool.
Nice. Well, Kristian, I'll let you go here. I really hope you stay safe and stay healthy, and please know, like, my door is always open. I don't like doing podcasts with somebody only once, and so we can get together, and I would love to do podcasts with you, or we do just talk about, let's pick two panoramas and just really talk about why you think they're important. and I'm totally
Cool.
down to do that too. So until next time, stay safe, stay healthy, and actually, where can folks find out? Is there a website or social media where people can find out about you or follow you?
Yeah, check me out on Facebook.
Okay.
That's the best way. Yeah.
Will do. I will let people know. Well, Kristian Paradis, thank you so much for your time, and I'll look forward to chatting with you again soon.
All right. Thanks, Josh.
Thanks, buddy. Okay, I hope you enjoyed that conversation. This podcast was brought to you by Liquid Drum. LiquidDrum.com down in Waco, Texas. Check it out. Hilarious percussion videos, awesome educational content, brand new snare drum book, method book out. Check it out. You won't regret it. LiquidDrum.com. Also, DunleavyPans.com, DUNLEAVY pans.com. Kyle builds and tunes all the steel drums I play on at NYU in Princeton and in So Percussion and personally. Check him out. He's an amazing tuner and builder and a really nice guy. DunleavyPans.com. Also, paninmotion.com. A bunch of my friends down there started an organization called Pan in Motion. They are a great advocacy organization for the steel pan as an art form, as a culture, but in specific what it does in the Brooklyn arts and culture scene. So check them out, paninmotion.com. And finally, mangochowclothing.com. Alejandro Mirage runs an amazing clothing company that's heavily influenced by the steel pan and its culture. Check them out, mangochowclothing.com. All right, hope you're all well. We'll talk to you soon.